You know, Kathy and I are finding out real fast that if we don't write something down, we forget about what is going to happen. So, Kathy, don't forget to get some paper to print the bulletins off tonight. Okay? And Kathy, have to help me out on this one too. I think I got it straight. Uh, Judy Beaver, of course, who I think we all know, husband passed away. It's probably been a year, a little over a year ago, I guess. More than that, whenever. Well, she's getting married again, right, Kathy? Well, we don't know when, but she's getting married again, and she's marrying a widower who's an elder in the church where they go. And the what was her husband's name? Merle. Merle and Judy were married in Mansfield, and Don Cooper married him. Well, he's going to marry her again. Uh, but I don't think Kathy gave me a date. So anyway, I thought you'd be interested in knowing that. Uh, Leroy didn't give us, very comforting news, but the truth of the matter is that our nation is showing less and less respect about spiritual matters, and in 20 years from now, it will probably be minute in terms of numbers unless some things change. But I was really, and I'm going to say this, he's not here tonight, but I'm going to say this because I feel it. I was very glad to see Rob Huey here this morning. Rob is a true gentleman. His father is a true gentleman. His grandparents were. But here he's down in Licking County somewhere on a private reserve hunting. But of all the hunters that were down there today, he left and came all the way up here to go to church services. Rob never misses a worship service. When he was a boy, well, Rob used to say, I never heard a preacher other than Vinton Morgan until I went to college. I preached in the congregation where he was born and grew up for years and years. And then when he got out of college, he went to Westview, and guess who was preaching there? Poor Rob. But when he was a young boy, after his baptism, I tried to get them to lead singing and give a lesson, and Rob wouldn't do it. I tried to get Danny to do it, and he wouldn't do it. And so Rob and Danny were best friends, and they got together and said, if he'll let us both stand up there, we'll do it. So that's the only time I ever was in a gospel meeting or in a worship service where there were two song leaders up front. Now, they weren't perfect boys. In the congregation where they grew up and I was preaching, the building was about this size, but the auditorium slanted towards the pulpit, and there was no carpet on the floor. So Danny and Rob sat on the back pew, and they decided to swap BBs one Sunday morning. Do I need to tell you what happened? They rolled down the aisle, dove down under the pews. Women were kicking them. It's like, what is that, the squirrel in a self-righteous church in Mississippi. And I couldn't help. I just started laughing. So did everybody else. But there are good people. There have been, there always will be. And I'm thankful for good people like Rob. Well, that's free of charge. And if I remember something else to tell Kathy, I'll interrupt and tell her. Let's turn to Luke chapter 6, please. Some of the things that Jesus taught were hard to understand, but not so much as compared to some of the things the Apostle Paul wrote. Even Peter acknowledged that the writings of Paul were somewhat difficult to understand. Jesus' teachings were rather simple, but the problem did not lie in the simplicity. The problem lies in the fact that it's difficult to think like Jesus thought and to do what he said. Now, in the 6th chapter of Luke, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, we find in verse 31, "And as you would that men should do to you, do you also to them likewise." In other words, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, I'm still struggling with that. And the reason I am is that I find that the way I want to be treated is not the way other folks want to be treated. So if I treat them the way I want to be treated, it's not what they want. And it's very difficult to treat your enemy the way you want to be treated. It's not difficult to understand it. It's difficult to put it into practice. Now let's move our attention down to our verse. We just have one verse tonight. Verse 38. Jesus begins with the word give. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet with it shall be measured to you again. And I'm struggling. Ryan and Nathan, I mean. The preacher from Kentucky, what's his name? Dale Turner's wife. I can't think of her name. Margaret. Margaret's father was a farmer, and he owned a small feed store. He was a very staunch Christian, very dedicated. One of those men that there was no difference in him in public, in worship, as it was in his private life. This was his favorite verse. And this verse governed his business. If he sold you a bushel of wheat, and I don't know that he sold wheat, but if he sold you a bushel of wheat, he made sure that you got more than a bushel. Now notice what it says here: pressed down, shaken together. You know. Now I know of a man that in our community here who is in a business, small business, and when he sells his product and all of the neighbors know it, he puts the very worst quality of what he's selling in the bottom of the container and the very best on top. Now, folks, that's not what's spoken of here. Tonight, our theme is giving. Okay. Now, in order to appreciate verse 38, and we're going to come back to it here, we need to go into the previous verses where Jesus is talking about giving. It's very important to me to know that in America, we are the best givers of any nation in the world. We give more in terms of the government and individuals than any nation in America. Now, of course, one of the reasons for that is we're richer. But we are a giving nation. Churches of Christ in America, folks, have the highest giving rate of any religious group in America. We are a giving people. Now, in the verses that precede this, Jesus makes some very significant points about giving. Jesus said, and I'm going to put it in my words, don't give with a hope of receiving. We need to drill that in our heads. Now, I'm on a board, and we're always trying to get funds for the organization of which I'm one of the trustees. And we had a meeting the other night, Thursday night, and we were talking about that. And they said, well, we need to solicit funds, and we've got to give somebody something in return. We've got to publicize their name or promote their business or something. And someone commented, if we don't give them something, they're not going to give us something. If you read verses 33 and 34 in the verses that precede tonight, Jesus said, you don't give in hope of receiving something. And here's his point. If you give in the hope of receiving something and you do receive it, then you've got your reward. Okay? So if you give to an organization and they're going to promote your name or company or whatever it might be, then you've gotten your reward. So don't give in the hope of expecting something in return. Secondly, when we give and we receive nothing in return for it. If we give our time, we give our money or some material possessions that we have, and we receive nothing in return, the results are going to be great. Because God's going to give the results. And the results are going to be greater than anything we could receive for giving. Jesus used another phrase. It's over in the book of Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. It's called laying up treasures in heaven. Okay? I have a lot of names floating around in my consciousness. Today, Kathy and I were talking, and I was trying to remember the names of Rob's aunts. He's got a whole bunch of them. They were all girls in that family. And I finally got them all, I think. And some of those ladies were tremendous givers. Now, I'm not talking about money because they didn't have a lot of it. But I had the opportunity to speak at all of their funerals, except one. And we'd moved up here by that time. And I thought as I spoke at those funerals that here was a lady that gave so much to her family and so much to the work of the church, and she never got any financial return. And I don't think any elder ever stood up and praised their names, they're givers. But they didn't get any reward for it. They didn't get anything in turn. And I'm sorry to say there have been individuals in the church who have given and they want to be rewarded for it. I remember one lady who angered me. I didn't show my anger, but it was on the inside. The elders had announced at the end of the service that particular Sunday that one of the brethren had donated enough money to build an orphanage in Haiti. Just wrote out a check for it. Well, he was wealthy. And she met me at the door as she exited, and she said, I put $100 in the collection and nobody praised me today. Something was wrong there. Jesus said, if you give and you don't receive anything in return for it, then the blessings are going to be great, because in reality, you're laying up treasures in heaven. Now let's go back to verse 35, I think it is. Okay. But love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. Who's the highest? You shall be children of God. Now look at what Jesus said the reason for that is. For he, that is God, is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Did you know that was there? God causes the rain to fall on who? The good, the evil. Does the Lord do good to those that are unthankful? You know, there have been people today that have enjoyed the pleasures of the day. They've enjoyed the food. They've enjoyed life. And not once thanked the giver of all of it. So the point Jesus is making here is, if you give and receive a reward, okay, you got it. If you give and receive nothing, then your reward is going to be multiplied by the God of heaven. And you're going to be his child. And you're going to be like him. I meant to look it up, and I didn't do it this afternoon, but there are several times in the Gospels that Jesus made reference to the fact we want to become like God. And he mentions the things that we might do. For example, let me give you one of them. If we forgive those that ask for forgiveness from us, we're like God. Think about it. Does God forgive us? Yes. Does he forgive those that ask? Yes. Now let's go down to our key verse here for a few more minutes. The subject is giving. And this, I think, is a summation of what Jesus is talking about in the previous verses. And why put it this way, the conclusion of the whole matter. And matter of fact, at the end of verse 38, you'll notice that Luke ends the Sermon on the Mount and goes to a parable that Jesus is teaching. First of all, we find the principle of gain. Notice that giving results in gain, folks. Let me say that again. Giving results in gain. Now, it doesn't say gain in money or possessions. But there are some things more important than money and possessions. And I don't need to try to convince you of that tonight. But there's a principle of gain. And that is this. Give, and it shall be given unto you. That's the principle. If you give, it's going to be given unto you. And you know, I am a witness to the validity of that, and you are too. You know, maybe we've given some time, money, whatever we might possess. Received nothing for it. But in the end, we've been blessed. Maybe not by the person we gave to, but by others. I stop and think every once in a while of some of the folks that have done things for me. And, you know, most of them have nothing to do with money. I was talking to Kathy, I guess, several weeks ago. We were talking about grandparents. I don't know about you, but I don't remember but one time that my grandparents ever gave me a penny. And that was Grandpa Morgan, who gave me a Morgan silver dollar. That was it. And I know grandchildren today say, well, Grandpa, give us a $20 bill. We want to go down to the ice cream shop and get an ice cream cone. I'm sad to say I don't. I think it's in the lockbox. I think. By the way, it was worth $1 when he gave it to me. But, I grew up never knowing grandparents to give their grandchildren money. Now I know the world's changed. Okay. But the principle is you give and somebody else is going to bless you. And it doesn't have to do with money necessarily. As a preacher, and now I'm working on 54 years, you look back on those years and you think of all of the things. I have at home an old hymn book, really old, that Lyman Forkham gave me. You don't know who Lyman Forkham is. He's been dead 40 years. And I treasure that thing. I think it goes back to 1850. And that's just a little material thing that doesn't count in the scope of everything. And then all the people that have given you advice, encouraged you. And I think of Brother Larry Sharp. He's still alive. He's bedridden now. He was an elder in the church who did so much for me in so many ways. And when I sent a Christmas card down there, I wrote a little note and I said, Larry, I want to thank you and Jeanette for everything you've done for me. The principle of gain is you give. Okay? Let's go to number 2 quickly here. Also, the proportion of gain. Let's look at the proportion. Jesus said, the proportion shall be good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. What's that mean? You give, what are you going to get? More than you gave. It's just truly amazing to read these verses and look at what Jesus is saying to us. Be givers. And in essence, you're going to get back more than you expect. If you give $100 to some organization and they promote your name or your business, you've gotten $100 worth of publicity. But the Lord sees to it that you get more back than the $100, and we're not talking about money. And then there's one more. Look at it and let's look at it together. The place of the gain. Shaken together, runneth over, shall men give into your bosom. What does that mean? Where's your bosom? Your heart? Is it your hands? No. Is it your feet? No. When you go out to do a job, you will use your hands, you may use your feet, you may use your brain. You're working for it, right? So when men shall give you back into your bosom, you're getting it without labor. In other words, it's yours because you were a giver. Again, think about, and I apologize tonight, but I can't think about this without thinking about myself and all of the experiences that I've had with people. And here they gave to me something I could not earn, that I could not receive, from my labor. And I could bore you, I guess, and tell you a whole lot more stories, but the idea is that Jesus said, you be a giver, not necessarily to get it back. Give even to your enemies. By the way, he said previously, if they take it from you, don't ask for it back. Be a giver, and you will gain from it. If you gain nothing on this earth, the Lord will multiply it, and it will be great, and great shall be your reward in heaven. Lay up treasures in heaven, you become more like the God of heaven. And finally, you'll receive an abundance of it, and you will receive it without labor. Now, there's a lot of things we earn by our labor, right? Man, Jerry, Kathy and I got hot the other night. Not at each other. We were talking about people who refuse to work. I know that's a button, isn't it, Jerry, that you don't want to push. But God made us to work, right? And we're to earn our living by the sweat of our brow. But here, Jesus isn't talking about that. He's talking about giving. We need to be givers. Let's take a moment here, and I want to read. Let's start here in verse 30, and I want to read the verses that we've been talking about. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as you would that men should do to you, do you also to them likewise. For if you love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have you? For sinners also do even the same. And if you lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have you? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies, and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind even unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. For give, and ye shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. Anybody comment? Thank you. Take your hymn books, and Jerry's going to lead us in a verse or two of 576. And if there's a need for you to respond to the invitation, do so now while we stand and sing, please.